Hello, and welcome to the Ohio Individual Service Plan, also referred to as the Ohio ISP or OISP Overview Training. My name is James Bennett, and I am a reviewer with the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. Joining me today is Carol Tufano, who is also a reviewer with the ODD. This is part one of a two-part training. Part one will serve as a brief overview of the exciting new OISP project. The presenters in part two will take you on a deeper dive into this information. Live chats will be available to ask questions at a later time. Before we get started, we just want to say thank you to Director Davis and everyone involved in this process for their time and commitment to help make this a reality. As mentioned, there will be two parts to this training. You must complete part one before you are able to advance to part two. The takeaway for today's part one training include why the system needed to make the change to the single assessment and plan, and clarification on the key principles and a brief review of the familiar concepts that remain an essential part in the single assessment and planning tools. For part two, the presenters will share a brief presentation on what you can expect to see in the OISP and the interface with the new IT platform, as well as proposed rollout dates for trainings and implementation. Before moving forward, it is important to take a moment to review how the process has worked to date. As Carl Sagan once said, you have to know the past to understand the present. There are 88 different counties and over 400 ICFs in the state of Ohio. An ICF is an intermediate care facility, which is a licensed residential setting option of 4 or more individuals that offers a package of services, including 24-hour staffing. There has been a lack of standardization to date. This training is not just about a single plan, but also about how standardization will bring systemic change. Right now, there are potentially over 500 different ways for plans to look. The current process does not support the person, it supports the system. Also, there are various inefficiencies due to repetitive processes and planning tools. The process is not streamlined to make efficient use of time, reducing the amount of time available to spend with people who receive services. There have also been compliance concerns in the past. Compliance issues currently exist for a variety of reasons, such as the assessment and plan not aligning, the plan not being updated when changes occur, plans not being shared, and feedback from all team members not being taken into consideration. Plan is not always followed the person. If a person moved, it would often restart the process and cause some of the history to be lost. County to county transfers could be a challenge, even within the same system. And finally, plans haven't always been easily understood. Some plans could be difficult to understand and implement. With no consistency or structure, it could be confusing for a provider working in 2 separate counties or staff working at 2 separate ICFs to know where or how to find information in a plan. As the quote states, the only constant in life is change, and this is certainly an appropriate motto for the year 2020. Throughout this process, several town hall meetings were conducted to understand the hopes and fears that the field had surrounding a single service plan. High-level town hall feedback was gathered. Here you can see a word cloud, with the larger words representing more frequent responses. Some of the more common hopes expressed by the field include person-centered, simplicity, consistency, easier for providers, easy to understand, reader-friendly, training, role requirements, less repetition, and easier for individuals. Some of the more common fears expressed by the field include not person-centered, long, frequent changes, IT issues, lack of info, time-consuming, and not applicable to all individuals. It is interesting to note that many of the fears are directly opposite of the hopes. One of the biggest hopes is for the ISP to be person-centered, while one of the biggest fears is that it is not person-centered. People were also seeking simplicity as opposed to a long process. We heard you. The town hall feedback was used to develop the Ohio ISP. So, What are the underlying principles that define why DoDD is moving to a standardized assessment plan? These key principles are driven by Director Davis's core values, which will shape all future work. These include kindness and empathy, collaboration, transparency, innovation, quality, inclusiveness, and accountability. Applying these core values, the process should be treated the same for all people in the system, regardless of services or funding such as ICF or waiver. It is not about existing services, but more about the supports the person needs. The key principles include focus on the person, not just the service. Plans and assessments change as the person's life changes. And all DD systems utilize the same process. Using these key principles as a foundation, we will briefly review some familiar concepts that are central to the process. Here to enlighten you is my esteemed colleague, Carol Tufano.
Now that Jim has clarified Director Davis's key principles and explained why the move to OISP was necessary, I'll move on to the concepts found in OISP that are familiar to you and those that may have slightly changed. As you can see on the slide, the current concepts of team process, person-centered thinking, person-centered practices, and person-centered planning are the framework for the OISP. So first, let's begin with what the team process has to offer to OISP. It's the team that puts person-centered thinking and planning into practice, and this will not change. Teams remain essential to driving the standardized OISP. The members that remain important to the team process are the person, the QIDP or SSA. This is the individual who helps the person write their plan and keeps the team focused. And then there's also the parent, guardian, advocate, the provider, and other people who are important to the person. Although individual teams may function differently, each team will continue to have the same shared goal, and that is to improve the quality of life for the person. Teams will continue to use creative ways to get information. The reviewers in part 2 of this overview will share several new and different creative ways the OISP process will get information. Everyone on the team continues to have a valuable role to play. Some roles may vary, but all members will continue to work together to help the person stay focused on the OISP. And finally, we want to acknowledge that the team will not find the OISP process to be a stagnant process, but rather a smooth and ongoing planning commitment made by the team to the person. In the same way that the team process remains an important piece of the OISP, so does the team's person-centered thinking. Moving to the OISP tool does not mean the team is adopting a system-centered way of thinking. Despite being a standardized process, person-centered thinking has been embedded in all aspects of the OISP to help the team. The OISP continues to prompt the entire team to discover what the person finds important while respectfully addressing significant issues in the person's life. Focus on opportunities the person wants out of life, and to carefully listen while helping the person make their own choices about services and outcomes. Likewise, person-centered practices are still essential. Ohio remains committed to person-centered practices in all areas of service delivery. The OISP is a standardized, person-centered approach that continues to encourage the team to focus on the individual during assessment, planning, and service delivery. During part 2 of this presentation, you will see how the OISP will look at services and supports in the context of what the person wants, what matters to the person, what it takes to support the person's health and safety needs, and how to best create experiences that help the person have the life they want. Now I will review a change that has been made to the essential elements of person-centered planning. First, what essential elements have not changed? As noted on this slide, elements 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all current elements that remain a part of person-centered planning. What has changed? Two elements that were previously listed as essential elements will no longer be seen as separate elements, only because they have been braided throughout the OISP. The first element is that of focuses on the positive. This element has been removed from the essential elements because it is woven throughout person-centeredness. And the other element is the Medicaid funded services element. This element is found throughout OISP and will automatically populate in the online tool. The new element that is listed is that of number 2, trauma responsive approach. As you have heard over the last several years, trauma has become of high importance to DoDD. Adding trauma sensitivity as an essential element of person-centered planning seemed the right way to highlight the importance trauma places in the life of a person and in the way services need to be delivered. If you are not familiar with the trauma responsive approach, I'm going to take just a moment and briefly walk through the 4 key elements that you see on this slide. First, the element of balance. This element involves learning how past trauma affects a person's behavior today. The next element is resilience. The team will explore what has the person done to survive their trauma and what supports do they have in place to help them with resilience. You also see simplification noted on the slide. This is referring to DoDD's commitment to creating an easy to understand trauma responsive approach that is naturally integrated into supports rather than being a separate assessment and a separate plan. And the fourth element is the element of commitment. Again, DoDD has committed to building a standardized OISP that will acknowledge the impact of trauma on a person's services, supports, and any training resources needed by the team. DoDD is confident that by adding a trauma responsive approach, that this will enrich the person's quality of services, calm the environment in which services are delivered, and more importantly, improve the overall quality of life for the person while at home, at work, and in their neighborhood. Jim and I want to thank you for your time and attention during this part of the high-level overview of the Ohio Individual Service Plan. In a short amount of time, we have attempted to share with you why DoDD moved to the OISP, Director Davis's key principles, and the familiar person-centered practices and approaches that remain an essential part of how we support the person. And with that, Jim and I bid you a heartfelt good day, or perhaps a good night. Thanks for watching.